One world, 10 years, Minecraft. If you were expecting some intensely elaborate world with a megatropolis of buildings, you're sorely mistaken. Rather, a build for an extended period of time, then have the crippling realization that there's better things I could be doing with my time, and slowly fade away from the craft for a while, before being inspired again, coupled with the fact that I've built mega structures on other maps with perfect flat surfaces. One would think you would have done that sooner. Yep. Let's take you on safari, shall we, and see where my world started with my earlier, granted crappy, Minecraft builds. Day 1, spawning in the world, and what the hell do you build? Whatever the thing comes to mind. You think, well, I have to make this world my own. Let's begin with a little hut to call home before I go exploring, and then think, well, I have an idea as to what I actually want to build, so let's find a land big enough to clear out. Final Fantasy VIII was a complete obsession of mine since I was about 12 years old, and I wanted to build a large structure from there called Balamb Garden. I wanted to build that, even though I had no prior history of building mega structures in Minecraft. It was the best I could do given the resources at the time and the level of creativity that I had with mega structures such as this. I couldn't even build a perfect circle. Look, I had to build a hexagon, even though the place is built within a circle. Yeah, one would think you'd do some practice beforehand before you do a mega structure from scratch. Psh, the practice isn't trial and error. Now, I wanted to build the thing in its entirety, the outside, the inside, like the library, the quad, the cafeteria, all that jazz. Try and get the famous ring above the gardens to look like it's supposed to look, even though I can't do circles. I do circles just fine now. Up next, we had this little desert village place that I called Zemford.
I had some strange names, and I'm not sure why.
The idea was to build something reminiscent of Agrabah from Aladdin, but far more small scale. Now, back then I had a potato computer, so I had no idea how far the desert actually was away from Balamb Garden because my render distance was terrible. You will soon notice that I have railways everywhere because initially when I built this world, and whenever I would explore, I'd have this irrational fear that I won't know where it came from. So as long as I have a train that goes to some sort of station, I can keep track of everything. It just seems like you have no real sense of direction. Shut up. And up next we have the Ant Farm Hotel. For some reason I wanted to build a giant ant farm that would essentially end up being a hotel. A hotel with very little privacy. I thought I was quite creative at the time. You see, Cooper? This is where creativity can get you. I should teach you a thing or two. This is how you build things. Up next we followed the railway that goes from Zemford all the way to the border of where all the snow biomes start. The Tundrasen border.
I thought it was quite clever using a name like Tundra in the name.
First up in the Tundrasen area is a giant tower that my younger, edgier self thought it would be cool to name
The Frozen Void Tower.
Pretty much at the time, I had just discovered what a nether portal was. I thought I had to make such a thing that goes to another dimension such as that to be unreachable. So you build a giant tower out of the darkest blocks you can find and just make several levels that you have to climb to get to the very top. Yeah, the stairs back then, there weren't many options, so I just used cobblestone. Doesn't look very good now. No, doesn't look that scary at all. Yes, quite. And up next, we have the Tarshear Mana. I wanted to build a giant or some sort of mannered mansion castle type thing in a frozen area. Again, my render distance back there was terrible, so I had no idea how close things actually were to each other. Anyways, with no real basis or idea as to how I was going to build this, I just started winging it and I ended up with this very arbitrary shape. As with all my structures, I can't leave the inside barren, so I furnished everything, added every level, added a kitchen, added this, added that to make it completely fleshed out, even though my creativity with regards to interior decorating wasn't that good back then. And moving along up the tracks further into the snowy region, we get to Stokin. I'm pretty sure I named this village after a gnome that I made in World of Warcraft once. Most of the time, whenever I build things and they end up looking relatively small like this, I always picture a Final Fantasy old pixelated RPG type village where everything seems more diminutive and small scale. I wanted to try and capture that, but as opposed to using pixels, I used Minecraft blocks. This is more of a recent build, not too recent, but more recent than everything else that I've shown you so far. Pretty much this railway goes up to my main village, which I call Hira, which we'll get to later. My most prized possession, because I love that village. And this one goes to the other side of the border, which we were at earlier. After first discovering this lovely snowy biome, I decided it was a good idea to put a bunch of TNT and always crash my game by making them all explode and making a crater. Now what exactly was the logic behind that? Fun. Shortly after that, I went in search north, and I found a mountain, and I called it Mount Dermer.
I couldn't tell you why.
So, okay, I just arrived. I'd like to make a little place called home, and I made it an inn that I built into the mountain because I thought if this is going to be any people's place, it's going to be dwarves. Some surface-dwelling dwarves that would be open arms to outsiders, and then there were going to be those that lived in the mountain. Which brings us to our next build. We go into this little hole right here, and we go to the little dwarven village of Winzerta. But hold up! I have a little lever here. Where's it go? It opens a piston. I think this was my very first time ever using redstone and piston, and I made a little secret going out the mountain. You're all about those secrets, man. This is Winzerta. I leveled out this entire mountain to try and squeeze in as much as I could to dwarves living in houses that might have been built inside a mountain. There's even a little store over here, and again, inside this lava pit, there is a secret way out that goes all the way out the mountain on the very far side. Secrets everywhere. Up next, after finding the surface of the mountain, I found a little crypt, so I built a giant pyramid, a very half-assed structure of pyramid-looking stuff above that, and then I made a little secret entrances behind it, and I used a lot of redstone and scary-looking darkness to try and add to conceal another portal. Obviously behind some ender dragon heads for some extra scary effect. Up to the next! I wanted to build something more modern. I do enjoy more modern than I do medieval, so I'm surprised that it took me so long to build. However, I decided to look north for a location to build my next city that I called Verhaden. Big glass walls, big glass skyways that I got inspired from Estar from Final Fantasy VIII. You'll find a lot of my inspiration is from Final Fantasy.
Ignore the perpetual darkness for now. There's a giant structure above our heads currently.
Yeah, I'm building an office block. That's a very recent build.
It's a bit delayed, but here I am.
In the far north corner of Verhaden, there is a lovely little glass bar, I suppose, with a lovely view of the sea. Up next, to address the darkness above, this is a lovely ship that I built as close as I could to one-to-one scale so that I could squeeze the inside as well. You know, it's difficult to squeeze everything with like a 1x1x1 block. 1 meter, that is. This is the Normandy SR2, specifically the one from Mass Effect 3. I didn't want to be confined to space to try and squeeze every level of the ship inside, so what I did was I built every level from the captain's cabin to the combat deck and all the way down to the shuttle bay, and then I built the ship around it so that I wouldn't be confined for space. It was the biggest build by far that I had ever undertaken, and this took me months. Mostly because you started, you lose inspiration, and you kind of get a bit of doubt in yourself and your ability to do such a marvelously large thing. And then to take a break, come back to it, take a break, and then eventually I finished it. And I was tremendously proud. I obviously used a texture pack or a resource pack to make the thing a little more futuristic looking, but man, was I happy with this build. But we're moving on. I had seen some people build sprites, pixelated sprites from games. So I did an entire Final Fantasy square. I'm not going to go through all the characters right now. If you're a Final Fantasy fan, you'll know who each main character is from the series. Next up, we head south from Balamb Garden, a little place that I called the Oaken Keep. I wanted to build some treehouse type elven dwelling people, and I thought this was the height that trees could get to, so they're relatively low. Not a very great build, but one of the earlier ones. But that's pretty much the long and the short of it. And here we have the river-dwelling folk called Riverhale. Essentially, the idea in my mind is that they were hired to build this massive tower for ships to land on. And so there's the scaffolding. This is obviously some slabs and fencing before they had scaffolding in this game. But also, I built a lovely train station that's hidden away in the leaves. This is a ship called the Gecko from an anime called Eureka 7. Now again, I thought this was a lot larger. For one of my earliest bigger builds, I suppose, in my mind, it was relatively large, and then I quickly realized it was pretty damn small. Even though the actual ship that I'm busy building is much larger. And this here is the Aero Tower, and it's a very strange build. So we've got a parking lot below, and 2 security booths. Look how cool it would look to try and take off from this thing. And here we have Chasm Haven. As I was trudging about on my adventure looking for places to build, I discovered this chasm which I thought was larger, and I wanted to build something inside this chasm along the walls, almost like a Cosmo Canyon from Final Fantasy. More Final Fantasy inspired build. Again, the idea was to build something relatively small scale, like something you find in an old pixelated Final Fantasy RPG overworld type look. If you follow this mossy path over the water from the Chasm Haven, you get to a little patch of land just north of it. And you'll find, what do you find? You find Corrin's Lookout from Dragon Ball Z. Now, I was quite limited to the height, otherwise I would have made it much higher to the point that you couldn't see it in the sky, but I suppose I got it quite close to how it's supposed to look. And that's that. Now, we get to my pride and joy. Let me give you some background. I wanted to build a village or town reminiscent of the town called Luca from Final Fantasy X, because I've always liked seaside town. But the initial idea was to build a blitzball stadium. I wanted to build one of those in a large enough body of water to do so. So I went searching for water everywhere large enough to build the stadium, and again, my render distance sucked, so I couldn't really find anything until eventually I did. I settled there. I built a little train station so I could find my way there, and yeah, let's show you. Was a concept of a seaside village, very modern, and the basic color was red. But it started growing so much that it started to pretty much merge with smaller villages that I had built a bit further away, like the more old-fashioned one over here called Waylandville. And it started to merge with the Japanese village that I was building over here called Chibanatsu. And then it started to merge with the village that I was basing off of Balamb Town from Final Fantasy VIII, like a fishing village, and it just got too big, so now it's part of it. So I settled with the idea that all these cultures had settled here in one big city. I got a giant Finn-like hotel here called the Grand Finn Hotel. I got an opera house over here. This place has been a long time in the making. Now, again, if I had more time, besides everything else that I normally do, this would be a lot further. And I'm always building it alone, only with help recently with my fiancé. But besides that, it's always been alone. And it takes time. I mean, I have an aviary over here, for God's sake. But as you enter Hira, there's a restaurant to your right, a hotel to your left. There's a legal gambling place over here for some reason. Over here on the left is another blacksmith, an old-fashioned blacksmith. And on the right here is a nightclub. Let's go in there for a sec. And here is the entrance to the long pathway to the Hira Stadium. Here is an old-fashioned town square, essentially, building for fishermen. I found a place that looks like an abandoned quarry, so I made it an abandoned quarry. Put some walling around there, you can't go in. And over here, what is this? A giant docking bay, a docking bay tower. Now, if you go inside here, I wonder what this is. Have you ever wanted to attend a concert, but traveling costs too much? So how about I bring a ship to you that's got a concert inside of it? Look at that. I was very much into metal back then, and yeah, I thought a metal show and a flying ship would be cool. Let me take you into the stadium for a moment. Now, I could build a much bigger, better one easily nowadays, but at the time I was very proud of this build because I was just then figuring out how I need to do circles using squares. I loved how it came out. I even got fireworks rigged up top there, courtesy of my fiancée. She rigged up a system which fireworks could fire off, you know, because it's a stadium. Here is some arbitrary looking hotels. That's about it. It's got nice views. That's it. There's a giant library with pretty much the knowledge of the world on several levels. Looks pretty damn cool. I thought I'd make a tower out of it, make a cool little bridge towards it. I'm not sure how I'm going to do much from that. And here's a bunch of modern houses. I was looking up some ideas online as to how I'm going to make a modern house, and here's a few of them, all fully furnished, very homey. This here, some might be wondering, is a Skyway. I wanted to build a train that goes over the ocean. When I eventually find a piece of land, it pretty much heads nowhere. It lands on the other side at a train station, a nice one, but there's nothing else there, and the traveling takes way too long, so we'll avoid that. And that is the entirety of a bunch of builds over 10 years. Now, again, One would think I'd be much more further along with these builds and the grand scale of things. Keep in mind, there's a lot I didn't show you. A lot of little insignificant things in between that I didn't bother showing because this would have taken far too long and it wasn't really that significant in size or anything that's really worth mentioning. But if you cast an eye at this build over here that I didn't show you, I wonder what that is. It's called the Tomb of the Unknown King. It's a Final Fantasy build, which I'll show you in another video. It's not too relevant to this video. It's a very, very, very recent build. But oh no, look, it's an alien!